Welcome to A Verse, a podcast about poetry for the lovers and the loathers, which really means a podcast about words, life, beauty, nature, love, loss, loathing, rhythm and rhyme, about everything and nothing, and all that lies between. Welcome to A Verse. This weekend I'll be leading a workshop based on my latest book, which is about the practice of living love. As I've been getting ready, I've been thinking a lot about how and why this heart-centered practice of living love changed my life, turning me from an anxious workaholic into a much more balanced and joy-filled individual. 10 years ago, almost exactly, I looked in the mirror one day and heard myself saying this: "You're doing everything right. You've gotten your act together, worked your way out of a big disaster. You have a loving and wonderful partner, a business that is doing well, dogs and a home you love, and a city you love. You're doing everything right." Now, this caught my attention because I don't usually toot my own horn, but it's what came next that blew my socks off. You are doing everything right, and you're miserable. And I knew that was true. I was miserable. Then I heard one last thing. If you have to live another 40 years like this, you won't make it. That was the morning I vowed to change my life. There was only one minor little problem. I had no idea how to change my life. If I'd known how to be less miserable, wouldn't I have already been less miserable? After all, I'd been doing everything right, and I was surrounded by proof of all that rightness, and I was still miserable. Well, that was the year my father would have turned 100 years old, and there were celebrations of his life all over the world. And because I was both his daughter and his biographer, I was asked to come to these celebrations. Well, after that little come to Jesus moment in the mirror, I made a decision. I decided to do something different in those celebrations. A decade earlier, when I'd gone on 2 book tours for the biography I'd written about my dad, I talked about his life and career. This time, I decided to talk about how he lived his life instead of what he'd done. And that opened the door to everything that followed. Standing in the shoes of the person who taught me the meaning of unconditional love by unconditionally loving me, the person who showed me what it would be like to live a life so full of joy and curiosity and wonder, the person who opened the world to me and broke my heart, cracked my heart open once again. And I remembered for the first time in decades that my father's legacy to me had not been his fame or his glory, but rather his love and joy. And so I spent the rest of this year reflecting that love and joy to others, because that's what they wanted to feel. They wanted to know who my dad had been as a person. They wanted to know that this movie star they loved was someone worth loving. And he was. And I showed them why. I showed them through my own love and joy. And so, for the rest of that year, I was mostly full of love and joy. And then the year ended. But it ended with a clue. I knew what to do. I needed to bring more joy into my life. But how? When I shared this idea with people, they scoffed at the word joy. Joy feels like too much pressure. How can we feel joy when the world is struggling all around us? Joy? You? Bringing joy? You're the most miserable person I know. I didn't get the same kind of encouragement from my own friends that I had gotten from my father's fans. And so I faltered. The joy ebbed and flowed, and when it flowed, guess what? I felt joyful. But when it ebbed, well, there was my miserable self waiting for me. And then one day, about 4 years after that first epiphany in the mirror, I heard this little voice saying, "You need to create a daily practice of joy." I had quite literally no idea what that meant, but I knew it was what I needed to do. And so I started reading everything I could about practice. And practice, I discovered, means doing something instead of just talking about doing something. And it means doing that something in a daily and deliberate, conscious and committed way. Okay, but what about joy? I knew what joy felt like, but how do you practice something you're just supposed to feel? When I found this definition of joy, I understood. Joy is the pure and simple delight in being alive. That's how my dad had moved through the world. That's how I felt when I was with him and when I felt joyful. So, okay, I would practice in a daily and deliberate, conscious and committed way the pure and simple delight in being alive. So, one day, I began. Now, it wasn't like waving a magic wand, but slowly and surely, the practice changed me. It changed my life. It just took me a while to figure out why. And that's what this workshop on Sunday is all about. It's why radical, heart-centered practice can change and transform anyone's life. And joy was my first step. So today's podcast is about why joy is such a game changer. Stepping into joy, despite the naysayers and my own resistance, felt like the beginning of this poem by Emily Dickinson. "'Tis so much joy, 'tis so much joy. If I should fail, what poverty? And yet, as poor as I have ventured all upon a throw, have gained, yes, hesitated so this side of victory." You see, the thing about practice is that you have to, practice. You have to become a practitioner. You have to commit. And that's the real C word everyone is most afraid of, commitment. But as anyone who has ever tried to change a habit of thought, and that's what all habits are, thinking, you know how much resistance you encounter, till at some point you start to confuse the happiness attached to things or events or people with the true joy that lives inside each of us all the time, as sure as the beating of our own hearts. You see, we fear losing happiness. And then once we have, we spend the rest of our lives looking for it, either in the past or in something that feels or looks like or sounds like the past, as Tony Hoagland captured so brilliantly in this poem. Happiness, says Joe, is a wild red flower plucked from a river of lava and held aloft on a tightrope strung between two scrawny trees above a canyon in a manic depressive windstorm. Don't drop it. Don't drop it. Don't drop it. And when you do, you will keep looking for it everywhere for years. While right behind you, the footprints you are leaving will look like notes of a crazy song. Joy is something so different from that happiness that can be so tenuous, so easily lost. Joy, remember, is the pure and simple delight in being alive. Joy equals life equals love, as Carl Sandburg understood and wrote in this poem called Joy. Let a joy keep you. Reach out your hands and take it when it runs by, as the Apache dancer clutches his woman. I have seen them live long and laugh loud, sent on singing, singing, smashed to the heart under the ribs with a terrible love. Joy always, joy everywhere. Let joy kill you. Keep away from the little deaths. Because the only thing that joy kills is the unhappy you unhappily mining your past or your imagined future for an illusory happiness which only brings countless little deaths. Deaths of hope, deaths of trust, deaths of faith, deaths of belief, deaths of confidence. But the key to creating a daily practice of joy lies in one word, a word I rediscovered when I found my dad's handwritten graduation speech that he gave to me in my high school class over 40 years ago. He ended the speech with the first stanza of this poem by E. E. Cummings. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirit of trees and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. My dad wrote that yes in capital letters. Yes. Reminding my classroom mates that no gets us, well, nowhere. We can never move forward with a no. We can never connect with a no, and we certainly cannot find joy with a no, as Cummings goes on to write. I who have died am alive again today, and this is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings and of the gay, great, happening, illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any lifted from the no of all nothing, human merely being, doubt, unimaginable you? Now the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are opened. That's what creating a daily practice of joy did for me. It brought the ears of my ears awake, and it awakened the eyes of my eyes. It lifted me from the no of all nowhere and nothing and connected me to the life and love that have the big L's, the you with the capital Y. And that was the greatest gift of all. Before, I felt like W.H. Auden in this gorgeous poem of his. Beloved, we are always in the wrong, handling so clumsily our stupid lives, suffering too little or too long, too careful even in our selfish loves. The decorative manias we obey die in grimaces round us every day. Yet, through their tohu bohu comes a voice which utters an absurd command. Rejoice. I knew I was being told to rejoice, but I didn't know how. I'd forgotten that rejoicing is our birthright, our bloodstream, our beauty, and our business. So how do we rejoice? By practicing joy. And how do we practice joy? Well, I could give you a few ideas. First of all, remember what brought you joy in childhood and start there. For me, it was horses and flowers and dogs and jumping in puddles and C.S. Lewis and I Love Lucy episodes. So that's where I started. And for the 15 or 20 minutes I did those things, guess what? I felt joy. Instead of talking about wanting to feel joy or what I might do to feel more joy someday, I was feeling joy. I was joyful, exuding joy, experiencing the pure and simple delight in being alive. Because that's the thing about heart-centered practice. It automatically gets us out of our stinking thinking and puts us back into our hearts. So I've given you my practical advice about how to create a daily practice of joy. But for something more joyful, I'm going to leave you with this advice by Mary Oliver. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give in to it. There are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. We are not wise and not very often kind, and much can never be redeemed. Still, life has some possibility left. Perhaps this is its way of fighting back, that sometimes something happens better than all the riches or power in the world. It could be nothing, but very likely you notice it in the instant when love begins. Anyway, that's often the case. Anyway, whatever it is, don't be afraid of its plenty. Joy is not made to be a crumb. As Auntie Mame once said, life is a banquet, and most poor suckers are starving to death. We are surrounded by joy. Every day we are given the opportunities to experience that pure and simple delight in being alive. So say yes and go out and grab that joy. Joy is not made to be a crumb. Thank you for listening to A Verse, a podcast about poetry, about life and love, nature and beauty, about words, about loss and longing and loathing, about everything and nothing, and all that lies between. Poetry for the lovers and the loathers. Thank you for listening to A Verse.